lot of bird stuff on the table. My man Turron Davenport, USA Today, Eagles Wire. He joins me now with a plethora of opinions and nuggets on the Philadelphia Eagles. How are you, pal?
Hey, how's it going? A plethora, huh? I'll do my best to give you what you want.
Well, it seems that news always follows this team. A couple of signings, the owner talks, the GM talks, the coach talks. And what we get from this, Turron, is let's start with the owner, who sounds like a guy who, after 25 years, is happy to be in the football business.
Yeah, I mean, the whole patience thing and long-term stability is a good thing to say, but, I mean, at the end of the day, these fans here, they want a team that is going to win now, and
right, like the old I'd rather be 10-6 with a chance for 10 straight years than, take a swing and maybe be 12-4 once. And if we don't get, it sounds like 10-6 year after year is okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say it's okay because you want to have that legitimate shot to, win it all. I mean, the whole objective is to get to the dance, and you never know what could happen. I mean, you look at recent history, outside of the Patriots, for the most part, whatever team that catches fire late is the one that usually, is able to make a run in the playoffs and get a Super Bowl win. So I think that's what they're going to try to do. And of course, he's saying that the long-term part of it, but, you're giving a guy like an Alshon Jeffrey a one-year deal. You're giving Chance Warmack a one-year deal. I don't think that it's all so much long-term. I think there is some, aspirations to win now. And I mean, that's the end of the day. It's not for long. That's what the NFL stands for. So you need to go ahead and satisfy the fans as well as the players. You got guys who are aging, and your window could be closing with guys like Jason Peters, Jason Kelsey. So you want to go ahead and win immediately. And I think they gave themselves a shot to do that. We just have to see how this defense works and what they do in the first round of the draft.
Yeah, as you wrote at USA Today, Eagles Wire, Turron Davenport, that he's preaching patience as the key to building a contender. But it sounded like the theme really was, we have Carson Wentz, and now that we have that, we have a variety of ways that we can go about this.
Well, yeah, and I mean, that's the good thing about a guy like Carson Wentz. I think the best is yet to come from him, but he's playing well enough now. He's capable now of helping this team get deep in the playoffs. But, I mean, at the end of the day, you need to have pieces around him because he's not that guy that's going to be the engine that elevates this team solely. He's not that guy. He's the one that you have to surround with talent and allow that talent to, in turn, make him better. And I think that's what they're doing. When you bring in Torrey Smith, when you bring in Alshon Jeffrey, I tell you what, they draft Dalvin Cook. That'll change a lot of things on offense, too. So there are different things that they could do. I mean, they could even go O.J. Howard, and you give two tight ends that can catch the football as well as Trey Burton. You have a potent package. You have Brent Selleck, to come in and block when you need him to. But long story short, it's all about adding playmakers for Carson Wentz, and I think if they could do that, that team can contend immediately.
Turron Davenport's with us from the USA Today. You wrote about how Jeff Lurie's excited about Carson Wentz, and he gave a lot of credit to Howie Roseman, but how much of the credit now will need to go to Joe Douglas? Because it seemed that while Roseman was kind of instrumental in moving up the draft board and that both Roseman and Lurie equally had excitement about Carson Wentz, that this team's future, the patience that Lurie is talking about, hinges on Joe Douglas.
Well, this draft that we're about to see in less than a month is going to be instrumental in this team's future success, and that's going to be in the front office as well as on the football field because, Jeffrey Lurie has gotten a lot of praise for bringing in not only Joe Douglas but Andy Weidel. I mean, these are two solid talent evaluators. They come from the school from Baltimore, with the Ravens, Ozzie Newsome, Eric DeCosta. They come highly recommended. So they're going to need to produce results. And that's the thing that you have to see in this draft. With this draft especially being so deep at multiple positions, they will have an opportunity to really help turn this franchise around and get them back on that right foot. And I'm telling you, you sprinkle in the right players, this team, like I said, could compete immediately. First round, you get a guy like Dalvin Cook, like I said, you come back, and if someone like Kevin King or Keller Witherspoon, Chidobe Awuzie, these different corners, if they're there, then they could grab a couple corners outside of the first round that could start for them and do well. So they do have an opportunity to turn things around. The credit is going to go to Joe Douglas and Andy Weidel, the college scouting department, after this year. But, I mean, when you going into this year, pretty much everything that's in place is for the most part due to Howie Roseman's cap wizardry as well as just, his ability to sell Philadelphia to some of these free agents.
Turron Davenport, USA Today. Turron, has free agency changed your view on where the Eagles go at 14?
It has changed it slightly. Initially, I didn't think that Alshon Jeffrey was going to be able to wear an Eagles uniform because I just simply thought his price was going to be too high. So yet another situation. We have to credit Howie Roseman. But with that being said, now that Alshon is here, I think that wide receiver is not a necessity in the first round. It's something that, if Corey Davis, John Ross, Mike Williams are there, then you definitely have to take a long, hard look at them. But then in addition to that, you got second and third round guys like, Zay Jones, Isaiah Ford, Katie Cannon in the fourth. There are opportunities to bring in other guys to do some things, but they've set themselves up to where they could truly go BPA, best player available. And as long as that matches the need, if a guy like Jamal Adams, not that he would be there, but let's say he's sitting there at 14, they're going to have to take him and just kind of figure it out. But, in first round, they could go BPA for sure. And fortunately for them, there are multiple positions, where a good player is going to be available, maybe the number one or number two ranked defensive end. Obviously Myles Garrett is going to go early, but if Derek Barnett's there, you have to consider him. So they set themselves up well to where they don't have to, and they never should have reached for a particular position, but they don't have to do that. Obviously, corner is a position that they have to address, but fortunately for them, it's so deep, so you don't have to go first round. Outside of Marshawn Lattimore, with Sidney Jones being hurt, you have a group of guys where someone is going to be available in the second, whether it's Trey Davis-White, if Gary Conley somehow drops down. You got Tease Tabor, who ran the 40 time that everybody suddenly thinks he can't play football. So there's multiple guys that could be there. Quincy Wilson as well. So there's a lot of options for them in the second round.
Just plus play, baby. Take a look at Tabor there. Lattimore's one guy I said I would trade up for. Would you concur?
Yeah, that is. I was talking to a friend last week, and we were just kind of looking at guys that would be worth trading up for. And I think just because of the separation from Lattimore to the rest of the group, he's the one guy that I think the Eagles should definitely consider trading up for. And they're going to have to, jump ahead of the Cardinals, maybe even the Saints, who are in need of cornerbacks. So he would be the guy, but you see a lot of people have him going to the Titans, so it just really is going to be a matter of where does he fall? Because even Buffalo at 10, obviously Mike Williams and O.J. Howard are in consideration, but, there's a good chance he doesn't fall out of the top 10, and then what do you do?
Turron Davenport giving us a plethora of information here on the Eagles. As a couple of signings yesterday. Get your thoughts first. Patrick Robinson at corner. They needed a veteran corner, right? Is he sufficient enough as that veteran guy? Where do you see him playing on the inside or outside? Or that depending on what happens in draft, which I said, Turron, I would go corner. I'd take 3 in a row, second, third, and fourth round almost.
I wouldn't be opposed to that. As far as Patrick Robinson is concerned, at this point, he's a guy. A lot of people are taking solace in the fact that he was, a former first-round pick. But let's face it, he hasn't lived up to it. And if he's going to play, if he's going to be healthy, I could see him inside. I know he had some injury issues last year in Indianapolis where they just completely struggled, as far as the cornerback position was concerned outside of Vontae Davis. But, they have to take at least 2 corners. That's just a proven fact. And me personally, if I was the Eagles, I would have definitely got in contact with Tremont Williams with his agents and looked at getting him in because this is a veteran guy who he's 30 plus, but he's still in fabulous shape. He could play that inside for you, that nickel, and he's also an option in the return game. But more importantly, he's a veteran that, he went in and learned from Al Harris, the former Eagle in Green Bay, and just the same, he can impart that knowledge to whatever younger corners that they should draft. And I talked to some of his representatives, and he's definitely willing to do that. He's at a point in his career where that's one of the things that's important to him is passing the torch to the next guy in line.
Talking about some of the draft prospects, wide receivers, today Doug Pederson was asked about John Ross. What's your take on what he had to say? Because he kind of says wherever he ends up, he could potentially be a difference maker because of his speed. Does it sound like the Eagles would not be interested in him? But if at 14, with what they've done in free agency, as you mentioned, with Alshon and Torrey Smith, is Ross kind of out of the picture for you?
No, I think Ross is seriously in the picture and possibly more in the picture than Mike Williams, to be honest with you, because, what he brings to the table is what they could lack in a year or two with Torrey Smith. I'm very confident that Torrey Smith could still take the top off of defense. But when you look at John Ross, he's a guy that is uber explosive. So, and I'm not just talking about that 4-2-2. I'm talking about press and play. And you watch him, he makes things happen. And it's funny that he talked about Ross today and some of the things he said because, I asked him about Ross in a roundabout way. I talked about a receiver that is worthy of being drafted in the first round, but under 6 feet tall. And he said that, size isn't really an issue to him. The main thing that he focuses on is the receiver's release. Well, coincidentally, John Ross has the best release out of all the receivers in this draft. And then he talked about his ability to get yards after the catch, to catch the football and get open and be a game changer. These are all things that exemplify John Ross. So I think there's interest. I've personally heard from some people, within the organization that there is interest in him. And this was before the 4-2-2. So I would imagine that interest only elevated because he ran that 4-2-2. But more importantly, that speed shows up when you hit play.
Yeah, man. And, you look at guys who can play. I got to get your take on Joe Mixon because he's a big topic of conversation. Jeff Lurie was asked about him. He says we are about giving players second chances. He alluded to Mike Vick, but he says they value character. The Patriots have taken him off the board. You mentioned Cook. Would you have Mixon ahead of Cook? And do you think the Eagles, if he's there at 14, have to seriously consider walking down that road?
Well, I'll put it this way. I know I'm on an ESPN affiliate, so, I'm not going to, criticize Mel Kiper as much as I would like to for saying that Mixon is better than Cook, but it couldn't be further from the truth. Dalvin Cook is the best back in this draft, period. You like to watch Ezra and James. You like to watch Marshall Faulk. This is what he brings to the table. Now, understand, I'm not comparing greatness. I'm not saying Cook is a future Hall of Famer. I'm comparing style of play and the way that they can impact an offense. In my prospect preview, I use Garrison Hurst as a comparison. So, kind of think of it along those lines. But as far as Mixon is concerned, I think he's a good running back. But what I do find is going down a bit easier than some of these other running backs. You don't see him running through tackles as much as some of these other guys. And to be honest with you, when you look at a guy like Joe Mixon, I would quite frankly take Joe Williams out of Utah before I would take Joe Mixon. And by the way, he's an Allentown kid. So, he's someone I would take before Mixon. And that's not because of what he has off the field. It's just because of what I see on the field. And it's interesting, that they bring up the character and they bring up giving guys a second chance. And, Doug Pederson talked about, how high character is kind of like the new wave of things. But, truth be told, it should always be what you strive for. But at the same time, a part of high character is giving a guy a chance to be repentant for what he's done. And I think Mixon deserves a shot, and we'll see what happens. And it's just all going to be about how he's able to make the best of the second opportunity.
We're weaving through a lot of really interesting stuff here. Chris Long, okay, do you look at him as just replacement for Babin, better fit than Babin, just depth? What's your take on that little sneaky 2-year deal?
Yeah, I think it's a replacement for Barwin. I think
When I say Babin, I meant Barwin. I said Babin, right?
We knew what.
I'm looking at a picture. I'm looking at a picture of Chris Long with all the tats, and I made me think of Babin.
Well, I mean, just like Babin, Connor Barwin came from Houston, and they had high sack numbers, so it's all good. But when you look at Chris Long, I think that he's a good substitution, a replacement for Barwin. He brings a lot of the similar characteristics. I think that he's better suited to be on that right side, and that's what the Eagles need that desperately. They need a guy who will go up against left tackles and hold their own week in and week out, and that's what they lack right now. And I'm not saying Chris Long is that guy that could do that, but he could give you spurts of doing it. Up until I think it was 2011, he played right defensive end, switched over to left when Leonard Little moved on from the Rams. So he has past experience playing right defensive end, but I think really the key for him, and this is a guy that has played 7 years, I think all but 1 or 2 of those 7 years he played in 16 games. So he's a pro that understands just the importance of preparing for the NFL, the importance of as a defensive lineman, doing what you have to do to get yourself ready. And I never really took too much stock in that until years ago when Anquan Bolden went to the 49ers when I was covering them. And Michael Crabtree, you saw him elevate his game, and he began to really understand the meaning of being a professional wide receiver. So I think it's important to have that veteran guy that could come in and really show your younger guys the right way to do things. And that's what you get with Chris Long. I mean, obviously, he learned from his father. He has the bloodlines as well with his brother playing for the Bears. But more importantly, you look at what the Eagles are going to do. At some point, they're going to draft a defensive end, right? One of the guys that is seriously in their crosshairs is a guy named Avery Moss out of Youngstown State. I believe it was Chris Wilson. It was either Chris Wilson or Philip Daniels. One of them went out to work him out, and he's someone that I know they like because they talked to him at the Shrine Week. But this is a guy that, is relatively inexperienced playing defensive end, but has a lot of potential. A guy like Chris Long could help him.
Would they take a DN, in your opinion, at 14?
If Derek Burnett's there, I don't see why they wouldn't, to be honest with you.
Howie Roseman had said Band-Aids. Do you look at Patrick Robinson and Chris Long as such?
I look at Patrick Robinson as more of a Band-Aid than I do Chris Long. I think Chris Long, that they're bringing him in for more than just, temporary help on the field. Like I said, I think they're bringing him to help, show the way for their younger defensive ends. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, Patrick Robinson seems like a guy that, they had a guy in Leotis McKelvin. It seems like they just basically replaced one disappointment with another.
Yeah, I think McKelvin had a lot more potential. I would love to have seen how he could have done without that hamstring injury, because McKelvin, I think, could still play. Obviously, you have some of the issues as far as getting beat deep, but he made some pretty good plays as well. So I think McKelvin is still a better player than Patrick Robinson. But in this case, you got $1 million versus 3.5, and that's where the difference was.
Hey, do you see a guy on the current defensive line, Marcus Smith, McAllister, kind of a project, Means, working into the rotation more this year, or is it going to be kind of a long Curry split?
I think, you're going to have Curry on the right side, and you're going to have a BG on the left.
Yep.
And I think Steven Means, if given the opportunity to play, this guy could be productive for you. And they just need to give him the chance. I think it was the Falcons game. He had 1 sack in 5 reps. So he's someone that could be productive. And that was a sack fumble, by the way, a sack strip. So I think I expect Steven Means to get more in the mix. He's one of those guys that could get that speed to power, and he comes off that edge, gets a tremendous jump. He's the one that Jim Schwartz says Steven Means business, pun intended, and he would be the guy. But obviously Marcus Smith is going to continue to develop. Marcus is outstanding against the run. He didn't get enough credit for that. frankly, I think, outside of BG, he was their best defensive lineman against the run. Defensive end, that is.
Boy, so much stuff as we get ready for the draft season, which is less than a month away. Turron Davenport has plenty more over at USA Today. You can check him out over there at the Eagles Wire and on Twitter, of course, 24/7 at @TDavenport_NFL. Turron, I loved it, man. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks again.